JPMorgan just made a move that could reshape the next decade. A massive decade-long commitment worth $1.5 trillion. They call it the Security and Resilience Initiative. But the deeper meaning goes far beyond those words. Jamie Dimon was clear about one thing. America has become too dependent on foreign supply chains. For a country that leads the world, that's a dangerous weakness. And JPMorgan is stepping in before that weakness turns into a crisis. This initiative targets the most critical industries in America: defense, aerospace, semiconductors, energy grids, critical minerals, water systems, AI, and frontier technologies. These are not random sectors. These are the industries that collapsed the moment global pressure increased. The chip shortage stopped car factories. Port congestion froze the supply chain. Foreign mineral control exposed America's biggest vulnerability. JPMorgan saw all of this happen in real time, and they realized something simple. The next crisis won't be solved with interest rates or liquidity. It will be solved with infrastructure, technology, and control. That is where this $1.5 trillion goes. Not into banks, not into bonds, into the backbone of America's survival. JPMorgan is already preparing to deploy $10 billion directly into strategic companies. Companies building chips, energy systems, and critical manufacturing. This is not a charity move. Banks don't spend trillions out of emotion. They spend because the world is changing, and they want to be positioned ahead of that change. The last 5 years showed how fragile everything really is. A virus stopped global trade. A ship blocked the Suez Canal. China dominated mineral processing. Europe's fought an energy crisis. America watched and realized, if you don't control your own supply chain, you control nothing. That is the real reason behind this initiative. Rebuild what was lost. Recreate domestic strength. Prepare for a world that is no longer stable or predictable. The global order is shifting. Countries are no longer cooperating the way they used to. Everyone is racing to secure energy, minerals, and technology. In that kind of world, the winners are the nations that control their essentials. And the losers are the nations that depend on others. JPMorgan knows this. They're not just investing. They're positioning themselves at the center of a new era. Semiconductors are the nervous system of the modern world. AI is the brain. Energy is the blood. Critical minerals are the bones. Infrastructure is the skeleton. You cannot run a country without these, and you cannot compete globally without upgrading them. Most of America's systems are outdated. Power grids are aging. Manufacturing capacity is weakened. Mineral supply chains rely heavily on China. All of this has to change, and JPMorgan wants to be the institution that finances that change. Governments move slowly. Budgets drag through Congress, but banks can move instantly. That is why this initiative matters. It fills the gap where government action is too slow. Jamie Dimon has been warning for years that the world is entering an unpredictable period. Geopolitics is tense, energy markets are unstable, technology is advancing faster than regulation, and supply chains are one disruption away from collapse. This initiative is JPMorgan's answer to all of that. A long-term shield built through capital, not politics. $1.5 trillion, more than the GDP of most countries. More than 2 years of America's defense budget, more than the value of entire multinational firms. When a bank moves money at this scale, they are preparing for something big, something structural, something that will define the next era of global economics. The official language says resilience. But the deeper message is clear. America must rebuild its industrial bases before the next global shock hits. And JPMorgan wants to be the one holding the steering wheel. This isn't about the next quarter or the next election. It's about the next 10 years, possibly the next 20. The world is changing direction. Globalization is slowing. National strategies are rising. Economic power is shifting. This initiative is a signal, a warning, and an opportunity. JPMorgan is betting that the future belongs to countries that rebuild, not countries that outsource. And if that bet is right, this may be the most important financial move of the decade. When a bank commits $1.5 trillion, it is not reacting to the present. It is preparing for a future that most people haven't even imagined yet. And JPMorgan's future view is clear. The next decade will not be easy. It will be competitive, unstable, resource-driven, and defined by nations fighting for control of their own economic lifelines. JPMorgan is positioning itself right in the center of that world, not as a bank, but as an architect, a builder, a strategic force shaping America's next industrial era. The biggest clue lies in where this money will go. Into companies that secure energy independence, into factories that bring manufacturing back home, into semiconductor plants that reduce reliance on Asia, into mining and processing operations that break China's dominance over critical minerals. This is not a financial trend. It is a national redirection. For years, America outsourced everything because it was cheaper. Cheaper to produce in China, cheaper to refine minerals in Asia, cheaper to depend on foreign shipping. But cheap failed the moment the world hit real stress. Prices exploded, supply chain broke, countries shut borders, and suddenly the world learned a hard truth. Cheap is dangerous, secured is priceless. JPMorgan is responding to that lesson. They are treating essential industries the same way Wall Street treats blue chip assets. High value, low tolerance for failure, and absolutely critical for long-term growth. Jamie Dimon has said repeatedly that the world is entering a new geopolitical era. Countries are dividing into blocks. Technology is becoming a weapon. Energy is becoming leverage. And supply chains can no longer be trusted. This $1.5 trillion plan is built around those risks. It's a shield, a bet, and a roadmap. A shield against global shocks, a bet that America will reindustrialize, and a roadmap towards sectors that will define economic power. One of the biggest pieces of this shift is minerals. The world cannot build batteries, chips, missiles, satellites, or renewable energy without a stable supply of rare minerals. And right now, China controls the majority of processing. That is an enormous vulnerability. JPMorgan knows it. The US government knows it. Industry leaders know it. So where does capital flow next? Into mineral extraction, into processing, into building domestic alternatives, into forming new alliances with countries that can supply what China controls today. Another massive component is semiconductors. The chip shortage didn't just slow production, it exposed a fundamental weakness. Most advanced chips come from Taiwan, a region sitting in the middle of global tension, a region everyone watches nervously. JPMorgan's move signals that America cannot afford this risk anymore. If something happens in Taiwan, the entire global economy breaks. That is why chip investment is becoming non-negotiable, not for profit alone, but for national stability. Energy is another pillar. The last few years proved how fragile energy systems are. Europe learned this the hard way during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. America watched that crisis closely. Energy security is not just an environmental issue, it is an economic survival issue. If the grid weakens, industries collapse. If power prices spike, inflation explodes. So JPMorgan is directing money into energy resilience, modern grids, storage, transmission, clean energy, reliable baseload systems. This is long-term positioning, a bet on the systems that keep a country alive. Now, here's the part no one is talking about. JPMorgan's initiative forces other institutions to move too. When the largest bank in America commits $1.5 trillion, others cannot sit quietly. Competitors will follow, funds will follow, private equity will follow, sovereign investors will follow. This initiative won't just build projects. It will shift the entire direction of American investment, from software back to hardware, from apps back to factories, from speculation back to strategy. And the timing is perfect. Interest rates are high, debt is heavy, growth is slowing. Governments don't have the budgets to rebuild infrastructure alone. So JPMorgan steps in, not to replace government, but to power it. This is how the next economic era begins, not with speeches, but with capital. And there is a deeper layer to this move, one that is rarely discussed openly. If America enters a decade of competition with China, it cannot rely on China for the essentials. Not for minerals, not for chips, not for manufacturing, not for grid components. Self-reliance becomes a weapon, and JPMorgan is funding that weapon. This is why the initiative is so large. $1.5 trillion isn't normal investment. It's economic restructuring, a controlled shift, a financial repositioning toward national survival sectors. And it's built for a world that is changing faster than most people realize, a world where technology is power, where energy determines strength, where supply chains decide winners, where minerals shape competition. JPMorgan understands that the next decade won't be defined by consumer tech. It will be defined by industrial capability, critical infrastructure, strategic endurance. This initiative is not about the next quarter. It is about the next era, a world with new risks, new alliances, new rivalries, new winners. JPMorgan wants America to be on the winning side, and they want to be the bank that financed that victory. The message behind this initiative is simple. The world is entering a tougher phase, a more competitive phase, a more unpredictable phase. But the countries that rebuild their foundations will control the next 50 years. And JPMorgan wants to make sure those foundations are built with their capital. This is not just investment. It is influence, it is strategy, it is power, and it will reshape everything.